August 7th, 1994. Location: Oakville, Washington. The small town of Oakville, Washington was shrouded in an eerie silence as the clock struck 3 a.m. on August 7th, 1994. It was a night like any other, until it wasn't. The air was thick, humid, and pregnant with an unsettling stillness that weighed heavily on the town, like the calm before a storm. Officer David Lacey, on his routine patrol, noticed something strange as he drove down the empty streets. The steady drizzle he had expected on this typical Pacific Northwest night seemed off. The rain didn't pitter-patter on his windshield the way it should have. Instead, it splattered with a dull, sickening thud. "What the?" Lacey muttered under his breath as he flipped on the windshield wipers. To his astonishment, the wipers didn't clear the rain. Instead, they smeared a thick, gelatinous substance across the glass, reducing his visibility to nearly nothing. He pulled over, stepping out of the car cautiously, his boots sinking slightly into the sticky ground. The streetlights illuminated the bizarre scene before him. A blanket of translucent, jelly-like blobs covered everything. The road, the houses, the trees, all were coated in a strange substance. "David, what's going on out there?" crackled the voice of dispatch over his radio. Lacey hesitated before responding, his eyes wide with confusion. I don't know. It's not rain," he replied, his voice laced with disbelief. "You need to see this. It's like Jell-O falling from the sky." Meanwhile, on the outskirts of town, Dottie Hearn was awakened by the sound of something soft pelting against her roof. Thinking it was a heavy rain, she went to the window, only to find her farm blanketed in the same mysterious goo. She stepped outside, curiosity piqued, only to feel a wave of nausea wash over her. Sonny, come quick," she called out to her daughter, Sunny Barclift, who rushed to her mother's side. "What is this stuff, Mom?" Sunny asked, her voice trembling as she looked around in horror. The entire farm was coated in the slime, and it wasn't long before she too began to feel ill. "I don't know, but it's making me sick," Dottie replied weakly, swaying on her feet. "We need to get inside." As the night wore on, reports flooded into the local authorities. More residents of Oakville were falling ill, some so severely that they required hospitalization. The mysterious blobs seemed to bring with them not just confusion and fear, but something more sinister, an invisible sickness that swept through the town like a plague. Back in his patrol car, Officer Lacey received another call. This time it was an urgent one. "David, get to the hospital, now. We've got multiple cases of people falling ill, and they're all reporting the same thing. They've been in contact with whatever's falling out there." Lacey's heart pounded as he sped towards the hospital. The sight of the strange blob seared into his mind. The unease that had gripped him since the start of his shift deepened into dread. What was this substance? And more importantly, what was it doing to the people of Oakville? In the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of the hospital, Dottie lay on a gurney, her breathing shallow and labored. Sunny clutched her hand, her eyes filled with fear. "Mom, you're going to be okay. They'll figure this out," Sunny whispered, more to reassure herself than her mother. But deep down, they both knew that whatever had fallen from the sky that night was beyond anyone's understanding. And as the hours ticked by, with no answers in sight, the town of Oakville was left to wonder. What had descended upon them, and would it ever go away? The first sight of the blobs was both unsettling and surreal. Dottie Hearn squinted in the early morning light as she crouched down to inspect one of the strange droplets that littered her front porch. The blob, no bigger than a grain of rice, glistened eerily in the soft dawn light, its jelly-like form almost mesmerizing. "It looks like something out of a bad science fiction movie," Dottie murmured, her voice tinged with unease. She gingerly poked the blob with a stick, watching in morbid fascination as it quivered before settling back into its original shape. Sunny Barclift, her daughter, joined her outside, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, what is this stuff? It's everywhere," she exclaimed, gesturing to the blobs that covered their lawn, the trees, even the roof of their house. "I have no idea, Sunny," Dottie replied, her voice wavering. "But something about this isn't right. It's It doesn't belong here. More of those blobs, David. They're all over town. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. It's not just your area, it's everywhere. Lacey sighed, rubbing his temples as the strange events of the night replayed in his mind. This is getting out of hand, he muttered to himself. First, it was just a few blobs. Now it's the whole town. The blobs weren't just a one-time phenomenon. Over the next 3 weeks, the strange, translucent jelly rained down on Oakville 5 more times. Each time, the town was left in a state of bewilderment and fear. Sunny watched from her window as another wave of blobs descended from the sky, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's happening again, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with anxiety. Dottie joined her at the window, her expression grim. "We need to get to the bottom of this," she said firmly. "This isn't normal rain, and whatever it is, it's making people sick." In the local diner, the townsfolk gathered to discuss the bizarre occurrences, their voices hushed with fear and confusion. "It's like the sky is bleeding or something's falling apart up there," one man speculated, his eyes darting nervously to the windows. "Maybe it's some kind of experiment gone wrong," another woman suggested, her tone dark. "I mean, what else could it be? Jellyfish? Airplane waste? This is insane." Lacey entered the diner, his uniform still speckled with the remnants of the blobs. The room fell silent as he approached the counter, his face set in a determined frown. "Whatever this is," he began, his voice commanding attention, "we're going to figure it out. But until then, stay inside when it starts, and don't touch it. We don't know what we're dealing with." The tension in Oakville was palpable, the air thick with the scent of fear and uncertainty. The mysterious blobs had turned the town upside down, leaving its residents to wonder what horrors the next rainfall might bring. And as the days passed and the incidents continued, the once peaceful town of Oakville became a place of whispered speculation, of sleepless nights and worried glances at the sky. The blobs, small and seemingly harmless, had brought with them a sense of dread that lingered long after the last drop had fallen. The morning after the first mysterious downpour, Oakville was a town on edge. The residents, who had been captivated by the strange blobs that coated their homes and streets, soon found themselves battling something far more insidious. The symptoms came on swiftly, striking down both the curious and the cautious alike. Dottie Hearn was among the first to fall victim. "Mom, you don't look so good," Sunny said, worry etched into her young face as she watched her mother stumble towards the kitchen table. Dottie's skin had turned an alarming shade of pale, and her breaths were shallow, labored. I just need to sit down," Dottie murmured, sinking into a chair. A wave of dizziness washed over her, followed by a sudden, intense nausea that left her clutching the edge of the table for support. "I don't know what's wrong with me, Sunny. I feel like I've been hit by a truck." Sunny's concern quickly escalated to fear as she saw her mother's condition worsen. Dottie's eyes fluttered closed, and before Sunny could react, her mother slumped forward, unconscious. Mom, wake up!" Sunny cried, shaking Dottie's shoulders, but there was no response. Panic surged through her as she grabbed the phone and frantically dialed for help. The paramedics arrived quickly, their faces masked by a professional calm that did little to ease Sunny's terror. "We're taking her to the hospital," one of them said, loading Dottie onto a stretcher. "She's stable, but we need to figure out what's going on." As Dottie was rushed to the local hospital, the eerie quiet of the town was punctuated by the sound of more ambulance sirens. Similar cases were popping up all over Oakville. Residents who had come into contact with the blobs were experiencing severe flu-like symptoms. Nausea, fatigue, and difficulty breathing were the common complaints, but for some, the symptoms were far more debilitating. At the hospital, Dr. Mason furrowed his brow as he examined Dottie's chart. "We've got a full ward of patients with these symptoms," he said to the nurse beside him. "And it's not just people. I've had reports of animals falling ill, too." In a nearby veterinary clinic, Dr. Reed was dealing with his own crisis. "It's the strangest thing," he muttered, glancing at the clipboard in his hand. "Healthy pets dropping like flies, cats, dogs, even livestock. Whatever's in those blobs, it's hitting them hard." One of the worst cases was a local cat, barely a year old, that had been perfectly healthy before the strange rain. The cat's owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harris, had brought it in after it suddenly became lethargic, refusing to eat or drink. Within hours, the cat had died, its small body ravaged by what seemed to be severe intestinal distress. "I don't understand," Mrs. Harris sobbed, clutching the lifeless body of her pet. She was fine, until that rain. Back at the hospital, Dottie Hearn was stabilized but remained under close observation. Dr. Mason stood by her bedside, his expression grim. "We've sent samples of the blobs to the state lab," he told Sonny, who sat anxiously in the waiting room. "But until we know what we're dealing with, we're flying blind." "What do you think it is?" Sonny asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Mason hesitated, glancing down at Dottie's pale face. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever it is, it's not just making people sick. It's lethal, and it's spreading." As the hours turned into days, Oakville's residents remained trapped in a nightmare that showed no signs of ending. The blobs continued to fall, and with them came a rising tide of illness and death. The town, once a quiet haven, was now a place of fear, where the very rain was seen as a harbinger of doom. And amidst the growing panic, one question loomed larger than all others. What was the true nature of the mysterious substance that had rained down upon them, and could they survive its deadly effects? The unsettling events in Oakville sparked intense curiosity and fear, leading to a flurry of investigations as scientists and locals alike sought to uncover the truth behind the mysterious blobs. In a small, dimly lit lab at the Washington State Department of Ecology, microbiologist Mike McDowell leaned over a microscope, his eyes straining as he examined a sample of the gelatinous substance that had caused such chaos in Oakville. "You're not going to believe this," he muttered, his voice thick with disbelief as he called over his colleague, Dr. Linda Carr. "What is it, Mike?" Dr. Carr asked, peering over his shoulder. "I found bacteria in these blobs," McDowell replied, tapping the side of the microscope. "And not just any bacteria. These are strains known to cause severe digestive issues in humans. This could explain why so many people got sick." Dr. Carr frowned, her mind racing. "But that's not all, is it?" "No," McDowell continued, his tone grave. "At first we thought we found human white blood cells in the blobs, which would be truly bizarre. But there's no nuclei in these cells, so that rules out white blood cells. We're dealing with something different." As the lab tests continued, the speculation in Oakville grew wild. One of the first theories that circulated was that the blobs were human waste accidentally released from an airplane. The theory gained traction quickly. After all, it seemed plausible that something so foul and out of place could have come from the skies by mistake. However, at a town hall meeting, Officer David Lacey stood up, shaking his head. "It doesn't add up," he said, addressing the anxious crowd. "The Federal Aviation Administration told us that any waste from an aeroplane would be dyed blue to make it easily identifiable. These blobs are clear. Whatever this is, it didn't come from an airplane toilet." "But if it's not that," someone called out from the back of the room, "then what is it?" A heavy silence fell over the room, only to be broken by an elderly fisherman who had been listening quietly. "I'll tell you what it could be," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Jellyfish." "Jellyfish?" Sonny Barclift echoed, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "What do you mean?" The old man leaned forward, his expression serious. "The military's been conducting bomb tests out in the Pacific. It's not far from here, you know. I've heard stories. When those bombs go off, they send pieces of everything flying. Could be the remnants of jellyfish caught up in the clouds and dropped on us." The room erupted into murmurs, half in skepticism, half in reluctant acceptance. "It sounds crazy, but can you really say it's impossible?" the fisherman added, his voice rising above the chatter. Despite the bizarre nature of the jellyfish theory, it was one that stuck with the townsfolk. It was almost easier to believe that fragments of sea creatures had rained down on them than to entertain some of the other, darker possibilities. However, the theories didn't stop there. A few weeks later, in a quiet corner of the Oakville Library, a group of residents huddled around a dusty old book. The page they were fixated on described a phenomenon known as star jelly, a mysterious gelatinous substance that was said to fall from the sky during meteor showers, a phenomenon reported as far back as the 14th century. "I've read about this before," one of the women in the group whispered, her voice tinged with excitement and fear. "They used to call it astral jelly or astromixin. People have found this stuff all over the world, usually after meteor showers. They've never been able to fully explain it." "Maybe that's what this is," another man suggested, his voice shaky. "Maybe what we're seeing is something from out there." He pointed upwards, indicating the sky. The idea of star jelly, though ancient and steeped in folklore, resonated with the group. It added a supernatural element to the mystery, a suggestion that perhaps what had rained down on Oakville wasn't of this world at all. Despite the various theories, some grounded in science, others in legend, the truth remained elusive. Every lead seemed to lead to more questions. Every answer only deepened the enigma. The people of Oakville were left in a state of uneasy anticipation, wondering if the strange blobs would return, and what other secrets they might bring with them. And so, the mystery of the Oakville Blobs lingered, a puzzle unsolved, a story half told with the town's residents left to grapple with the unknown, hoping that the answers would one day emerge from the darkness. As the strange events in Oakville continued to baffle both the residents and the experts, the story took an even more unsettling turn. Despite numerous attempts to analyze and understand the mysterious blobs, the investigation was plagued by a series of inexplicable setbacks that only deepened the mystery. In the sterile confines of the Washington State Department of Ecology lab, microbiologist Mike McDowell carefully labeled a vial containing a sample of the gelatinous substance. He had been working tirelessly to unlock the secrets of the blobs, but the results were confusing, even contradictory. He was sure of one thing: the substance was unlike anything he had encountered before. "These samples, they just don't make sense," McDowell said, speaking into a recorder late one night. His voice, weary with frustration, echoed in the empty lab. "The presence of bacteria is clear, but the cells we're seeing, they don't match anything in our database, and the reports of white blood cells, it's impossible, yet there it is." But before McDowell could dig deeper into his findings, something bizarre happened. The next morning, he arrived at the lab to find the vials of samples he had meticulously preserved were missing. There was no sign of a break-in, no evidence of foul play, just an empty storage unit where the samples had once been. McDowell's face drained of color as he frantically searched through his lab, checking and rechecking every corner, but the samples were simply gone. "How is this possible?" he muttered to himself, panic creeping into his voice. "They were right here. Who could have taken them?" The disappearance of the samples sent shockwaves through the small town. When the news reached the residents, it only fueled the already rampant speculation. Theories began to swirl that someone or something was deliberately trying to bury the truth about the Oakville Blobs. In the dimly lit office of Officer David Lacey, the atmosphere was tense. He was on the phone with a reporter from a local newspaper, trying to make sense of the latest developments. "No, I don't have any answers," he said, his tone sharp with frustration. "First, the samples go missing, and now we're hearing that some of the test results never made it to the lab. It's like someone's trying to erase the whole thing." The reporter on the other end of the line was equally baffled. "Do you think this is some kind of cover-up? Maybe the military knows more than they're letting on?" Lacey sighed, leaning back in his chair. "At this point, I wouldn't rule anything out. But until we have more evidence, all we've got are theories and rumors." The residents of Oakville weren't content with just theories. In hushed conversations at the local diner and whispered discussions in the town square, people began to share their own suspicions. Some believed the government was involved, covering up a failed experiment that had accidentally been unleashed on their town. Others speculated that the blobs were a sign of something far more sinister, an omen of events yet to come. In the corner of the diner, Sunny Barcliff sat with her mother, Dottie, who had finally recovered from her mysterious illness. They had heard the latest rumors, and Sunny couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Do you think we'll ever find out the truth? Dottie asked quietly, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for an unseen presence. Sunny shook her head, her expression one of resignation. I don't know, Mom. Every time we get close, something happens to push the answers further away. It's like the more we try to uncover, the deeper the mystery gets. As the weeks turned into months, the story of the Oakville Blobs faded from the headlines, but the questions remained. The lack of definitive evidence, the disappearance of the test results, and the continued speculation all contributed to an atmosphere of unease that lingered over the town like a dark cloud. The residents of Oakville were left to wonder, was the truth out there, just beyond their grasp, or had it been buried forever, along with the strange blobs that had rained down on them one fateful summer day? And as the mystery continued to haunt the town, one thing was certain. Whatever had happened in Oakville was far from ordinary, and its secrets might never be fully revealed. The night was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the eerie events that had gripped the small town of Oakville, Washington. Officer David Lacey stood on the steps of the town hall looking up at the sky. The air was cool, the stars twinkling faintly above. A peaceful night, but one that felt heavy with the weight of unanswered questions. Sunny Barcliff joined him, her footsteps soft on the wooden steps. It's hard to believe it's been months, she said quietly, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting to see the strange, gelatinous blobs raining down once more. Lacey nodded, his expression pensive. Yeah, it's like it never happened, but at the same time it's something we'll never forget. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. The Oakville Blobs had come and gone, leaving behind a trail of illness, fear, and confusion. Despite the numerous investigations, the theories that had been proposed, and the intense scrutiny of both scientists and the media, the true nature of the blobs remained a mystery. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, Sunny said, her voice tinged with frustration. The lab tests, the missing samples, the theories about jellyfish, aeroplane waste, star jelly, none of it makes sense. We're no closer to the truth than we were that first night. Lacey sighed, a deep, weary sound. Sometimes, Sunny, there are things we just can't explain. And maybe that's the scariest part, not knowing, not having answers. The town of Oakville had tried to move on, but the incident had left a mark on its residents, a lingering sense of unease that crept into their thoughts during quiet moments. Theories continued to circulate, whispered in the back rooms of diners and during late-night conversations. But they were just that, theories, with no concrete evidence to back them up. In the end, the Oakville Blobs became one of those unsolved mysteries, the kind that people talk about for years, their stories growing more fantastical with each retelling. The Blobs had become a legend in their own right, a part of Oakville's history that would be passed down through generations. Sunny glanced at Lacey, a small smile playing on her lips. You think we'll ever know what really happened? Lacey chuckled softly, shaking his head. I don't know, Sunny. Maybe we're not meant to know. Maybe it's one of those things that just is. As they stood there under the vast expanse of the night sky, the mystery of the Oakville Blobs remained as enigmatic as ever. The truth, whatever it might be, was hidden away, perhaps forever, within the shadows of that strange summer, leaving the people of Oakville to wonder and speculate, their questions unanswered. And so, the story of the Oakville Blobs would live on, a reminder of the strange and inexplicable events that sometimes intrude upon the ordinary, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of the unknown.